The Miners' Lantern Festival bathed Blackthorn, Pennsylvania, in a warm, deceptive glow, the air thick with coal dust and the murmur of a crowd gathered in the town square. I, Clara Harper, 32, a librarian who doubled as the backbone of our family's general store, stood frozen as my mother's voice cut through the festive hum like a blade. "Clara, you were just taking up space," she declared, her tone sharp enough to silence the chatter around us. Evelyn Harper, my mother, stood on the festival's main stage, her silver hair catching the lantern light, her eyes avoiding mine. Beside her was a young woman, her suitcase gleaming under the strung lights, her smile smug as she surveyed the crowd. "Your room belongs to Lila now," my mother continued, gesturing to the stranger. "She's family, and she deserves it." The words landed like a public flogging, each syllable stripping away my place in the family, in our century-old Victorian home, in this town I'd poured my life into. The crowd's whispers grew, their eyes darting between me, the stranger, and my parents. My father, Leonard, stood at the edge of the stage, his face a mask of discomfort, his silence louder than her proclamation. My brother, Nathan, leaned against a lamppost, his smirk mirroring the stranger's, as if my humiliation was a shared joke. The festival, Blackthorn's annual nod to its coal mining roots, was supposed to be a celebration of community, of history. Lanterns swayed above, each one etched with the name of a miner from decades past, their light casting long shadows over the cobblestone square. Our family's store, Harper General, had sponsored the event for generations, its name on every banner, every program. I'd spent weeks organizing the festival, balancing the store's books to fund it, even hand-painting signs to honor the town's heritage. Yet here I was, publicly discarded, my room, my sanctuary of books, sketches, and memories, handed to someone I'd never met. The betrayal wasn't just the loss of my space, it was the spectacle, the deliberate choice to shame me before the town. I clutched a crumpled festival flyer, its faded image of our Victorian home staring back at me, a detail that felt heavier than it should. Why the stage? Why now? The questions burned, but I didn't scream or cry. My hand steadied, my gaze locked on the stranger, Lila, they called her. Her presence was a puzzle, and I was already piecing it together. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with sharp cheekbones and a confidence that didn't match the hard times my mother vaguely referenced later, when I cornered her behind the stage. "Lila needed a place," she said, her voice clipped, as if I were a child asking for too much. "You're always at the store or the library, Clara. You don't need a room." Her dismissal was practiced, but her eyes flicked to Lila, who stood a few feet away, adjusting a pendant around her neck. It was a coal-shaped locket, intricate and unmistakable, identical to the one my mother wore, a family heirloom I'd been told was too precious for me to touch. The sight of it on Lila's neck was the first crack in their story. Family? I'd never heard of her, yet she wore our legacy like it was hers. The crowd's murmurs faded as I studied her, my librarian's instinct for details kicking in. The pendant wasn't just a trinket, it was a claim, a signal of something deeper, something my parents weren't saying. Nathan's laughter broke my focus. "Lighten up, Clara," he said, sauntering over, his new leather jacket gleaming under the lanterns. "You're making a scene." His words dripped with mockery, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease when they met mine. He'd always been the golden child, excused from store duties while I worked late nights, my college fund drained to cover his mistakes. Now, he stood with Lila, their ease with each other too familiar, too rehearsed. I didn't respond, but my mind catalogued every detail: the pendant, Nathan's smirk, my father's averted gaze, the flyer in my hand. The flyer, its image of our house wasn't just nostalgic. I noticed a smudged note in the margin, handwritten, barely legible, Harper Deed, 1920. It was a clue, one I tucked into my coat pocket, my heart steadying with purpose. They thought they could erase me, but I'd been overlooked too long to crumble them. Back at the house, the Victorian's gabled roof loomed against the night sky, its windows dark except for my room's glow. Lila was already there, her suitcase open on my bed, my books pushed aside like relics. I stood in the doorway, my mother behind me, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "Clara, it's just temporary," she said, but her hands twisted together, a tell I'd learned to read as a child. Temporary? The lie was flimsy, and her nervousness confirmed it. I didn't argue. Instead, I asked, "Why does she have your pendant?" My mother's face tightened, her answer a rushed, "It's a gift." A gift. To a stranger, while I'd been denied it for years. The second crack in their story widened. I stepped back, my voice calm but edged. "I'll sleep in the attic tonight," I said, watching her relief betray her guilt. She thought I was retreating. She was wrong, the attic was cramped, its air heavy with dust and forgotten things. As I set up a cot, I unfolded the festival flyer again, studying the smudged note. The Harper deed, 1920. I'd catalogued enough town records at the library to know deeds held secrets, inheritances, disputes, hidden claims. My parents' decision to give Lila my room wasn't just about space, it was about rewriting our family's story. I thought of the store, my promised inheritance, the years I'd sacrificed to keep it afloat while Nathan squandered money and my parents looked the other way. Lila's arrival, the pendant, the public humiliation, it all pointed to a larger betrayal, one I'd uncover piece by piece. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by the attic window, the festival's distant lights fading, my mind sharp with questions. Who was Lila? Why did they choose her over me? And what was the agreement I'd later find hinted at in a letter? The festival's lanterns had burned out, but my resolve hadn't. I'd been called a placeholder, a shadow in my own family, but that was their mistake. I wasn't just taking up space, I was claiming it. And I'd make them see it, not with tears or rage, but with the kind of precision that cuts deeper than any blade. The town would talk, not about my shame, but about my strength. What would you do if your family turned on you, right in front of everyone you know? I knew my answer. I'd fight, quietly, until the truth was mine. The attic's air was thick with dust, the cot beneath me creaking as I stared at the slanted ceiling, moonlight slicing through a cracked window. My room, now Lila's, felt like a theft not just of space but of my place in the Harper family, a wound deepened by the festival's public spectacle. My mind drifted back, not to the lanterns or the crowd's whispers, but to a decade ago, when the seeds of this betrayal were sown. At 22, I'd returned to Blackthorn, my history degree fresh, my head full of dreams to teach at the high school, to weave the town's coal mining past into lessons for kids who deserved to know their roots. Instead, the Harper General Store became my cage. Its hardwood floors groaned under my steps as I stocked shelves, balanced ledgers, and smiled through exhaustion, all while the family's legacy rested on my shoulders. My parents, Evelyn and Leonard, had made promises, vague assurances that the store would be mine one day. I clung to those words, pouring my youth, my savings, even my college fund into keeping the business alive when coal prices crashed in 2015. Back then, the slights were subtle, like cracks in a foundation you don't notice until the house starts to lean. My mother's praise was reserved for Nathan, her golden boy, whose charm excused his absence from the store. He's finding himself, she'd say, her eyes softening for him in a way they never did for me. My father, always quiet, nodded along, his silence a tacit agreement that my sacrifices were expected, unremarkable. I remembered a summer evening, my hands smudged with ink from tallying unpaid invoices, when I gave my mother a gift, a journal I'd hand-stitched, its cover embossed with a miner's lantern, a nod to our town's heart. She thanked me with a distracted smile, then left it unopened in a drawer. I found it years later, its pages blank, a quiet rejection I'd brushed off at the time. Now, in the attic's dim light, that memory wasn't just a slight. It was a clue, part of a pattern where my efforts were taken for granted, my presence reduced to utility. Another memory surfaced, sharper, more telling. At 17, I'd found an old ledger in the store's back office, its leather cover cracked, pages filled with my teenage handwriting. I'd spent summers logging every unpaid hour, every dollar I funneled back into the store to cover Nathan's reckless spending, car repairs, bar tabs, debts he never repaid. My parents knew, yet they never questioned him. Instead, they'd pat my shoulder, call me reliable, and turn away. That ledger, now buried in a box somewhere in this attic, was proof of my sacrifice, a record they'd ignored while promising me a future that felt increasingly hollow. I sat up, my fingers tracing the edge of the festival flyer I'd kept, its smudged note about the Harper deed, 1920, catching the moonlight. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was a key, a hint of something larger tied to the store, the house, and maybe Lila's sudden claim to my space. Morning brought no relief. I descended to the kitchen, where my mother stood at the counter, her movements brisk as she brewed coffee, her eyes avoiding mine. Lila sat at the table, her suitcase tucked in a corner like a trophy, her coal-shaped pendant glinting under the chandelier's light. She offered a smile, too warm, too practiced. "Sleep well?" she asked, her voice carrying an edge I couldn't place. I nodded, my face a mask of calm, but my gaze lingered on that pendant, a family heirloom I'd been denied. My mother's hands paused mid-pour when I mentioned it, casually, stirring my coffee. "It's a nice piece," I said, watching her closely. "You must really trust Lila to give it to her." Her jaw tightened, her reply clipped. "It's just a gift, Clara." A gift. The word was a lie, and her quick glance at Lila betrayed a flicker of unease. My father shuffled in, his shoulders hunched, muttering about inventory. He didn't look at me, but his fingers twitched, a nervous habit I'd catalogued since childhood. Nathan followed, his new watch catching the light, its cost likely drawn from the store's funds I'd spent years stabilizing. "Big day, sis," he said, his grin taunting. "Don't mess up the books." His words were a jab, but his eyes flicked to Lila, a shared look that held more than amusement. I sipped my coffee, letting the silence stretch, my mind filing away their tells, my mother's defensiveness, my father's avoidance, Nathan's overconfidence, Lila's calculated warmth. They thought I was beaten, relegated to this attic, out of their way. But I was listening, watching, my anger a quiet flame I'd sharpen into a blade. At the store, the familiar creak of the floors grounded me as I moved through the aisles, restocking shelves with mechanical precision. My real focus was the office desk, where my mother had started locking drawers I'd once had keys to. I found a receipt tucked under a stack of invoices, its ink smudged but legible, $1,500 for consulting fees, to Lila, dated a month ago, signed by my mother with a shakier hand than usual. Consulting? Lila wasn't even local. I slipped the receipt into my pocket, my pulse quickening. It wasn't just my room they were giving away, it was my legacy, piece by piece. Later, at the library, I pulled up the town's digital archives, searching for the Harper deed. A brief record mentioned a disputed inheritance in 1920, tied to our house and store, but the details were in physical files I'd need to access. The receipt, the deed, Lila's pendant, they were pieces of a puzzle I'd solve, not with tears but with precision. How far would you go to reclaim what your family stole from you? I was about to find out. The Victorian house stood silent in the gray dawn, its gabled roof casting jagged shadows as I descended from the attic, my boots barely whispering on the worn stairs. The sting of my displacement lingered, Lila's presence in my room a constant reminder of my eroded place in this family. The receipt I'd found, $1,500 for her consulting fees, signed with a shaky hand, had hardened my grief into a cold, sharp resolve. This wasn't just about a room, it was about the store, my legacy, slipping away like coal dust through my fingers. The festival's public betrayal, the pendant around her neck, the locked drawers, all pointed to a scheme I was determined to unravel. I needed answers, and the house, with its secrets buried in every crevice, was where I'd start. In the parlor, the air carried the faint scent of lavender, a trace of her perfume that now felt like a mask for deceit. She was at the store early, leaving the house quiet, save for the soft clatter of Lila unpacking in my former sanctuary. He was in his study, the door ajar, his voice a low murmur on the phone. Nathan was absent, likely sleeping off another late night. I moved through the parlor, my eyes scanning the familiar clutter, framed photos, a chipped vase, a stack of old festival programs. My fingers brushed a leather-bound guestbook from last year's event, its pages crinkled from use. I'd poured hours into that festival, yet they'd taken the credit. Flipping through it, I stopped at a page with a Pittsburgh address scribbled in her handwriting, dated 2 years ago. The name beside it, Lila Grayson. My breath caught. They'd known her for 2 years, long before she claimed my space, long before they called her family. This wasn't a sudden act of kindness. It was a calculated plan, and the store was its heart. I slipped the guestbook back into place, my mind racing. What tied her to them for so long? What was the agreement she'd hinted at, the one he feared I'd uncover? I moved to the dining room, where a sideboard held family relics, silverware, a miner's lamp, a box of letters I'd been forbidden to touch as a child. Her warnings echoed in my mind, sharp and final. Now, with the house empty, I lifted the box's lid. My hand steady despite the thud of my pulse. Inside were envelopes, most yellowed and brittle, addressed to him from decades past. But one stood out, newer, its postmark from Pittsburgh, dated 6 months before the festival. It was addressed to her, the sender simply Lila. I opened it, careful not to tear the paper, and scanned the words. "I'm grateful for our agreement," it read, "and I'll do my part to secure the store's future. Tell him I understand his position." The words hit like a blade. Secure the store? My store, the one I'd sacrificed everything for, was part of their deal. And he was involved, his position a shadow I couldn't yet see. I tucked the letter into my coat, my heart a drumbeat of betrayal and clarity. This was no impulsive decision, they'd been plotting for years, elevating her while pushing me aside. But why? The pendant, the receipt, now this letter, they were pieces of a puzzle I was assembling, each one a step toward reclaiming what was mine. Footsteps broke my thoughts. She stood in the doorway, her eyes narrowing as she noticed the open box. "Looking for something?" she asked, her voice smooth but edged, her pendant glinting in the morning light. I met her gaze, my own steady, reading the slight tension in her posture. "Just tidying up," I said, closing the box with deliberate calm. "This house holds a lot of history." Her smile wavered, a crack in her confidence, and I knew she sensed I was closing in. She didn't press, but her glance at the sideboard lingered, as if marking it for later. At the store, the hardwood floors creaked under my steps as I moved through the aisles, restocking shelves with mechanical precision. My real focus was the office, where she'd started locking drawers I once had keys to. Nathan was at the counter, charming a customer, his new watch catching the light, its cost likely drawn from funds I'd balanced. He caught my eye, his grin fading when I didn't look away. "What's with you today?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes wary. I shrugged, my voice even. "Just wondering how much the store is paying for consulting these days." His jaw tightened, a tell I filed away, but he laughed it off, turning back to the customer. In the back, he was sorting inventory, his silence heavier than usual, his hands fumbling with a crate, a nervous tick I'd cataloged since childhood. They were hiding something, and she was their key. But what tied her to the store, to us? To me, later, at the library, I dug into public records, my fingers steady on the keyboard despite the storm in my chest. The system was slow, but a marriage certificate surfaced. Lila Harper Grayson, married briefly to a Thomas Grayson in Pittsburgh, 5 years ago. Harper. Our name. My stomach churned. Was she a cousin, a distant relative? Or something closer? Something they hadn't dared admit? The letter's words echoed, her part in securing the store, his position. I leaned back, my mind mapping the connections. They thought they could bury me, but I was digging, and every secret I unearthed brought me closer to the truth. What would you do if your family built a lie to erase you? I was about to show them. The morning air in Blackthorn carried the faint bite of coal dust, a reminder of the town's past that clung to everything, much like the weight of the letter I'd found in the parlor, its words about an agreement to secure the store still burning in my mind. Lila's presence in my room, her pendant, the receipt for her consulting fees, each was a piece of a puzzle that pointed to a betrayal far deeper than I'd imagined. The Victorian house, with its creaking floors and shadowed corners, felt like a stage where my family's lies played out, and I was no longer content to be a silent player. The store, my promised legacy, was slipping away, and the marriage certificate naming her Lila Harper Grayson had raised a question I couldn't shake. What tied her to us, and why were they so desperate to keep it hidden? I moved through the days with a calm that masked the storm inside, my every action calculated, my eyes catching every tell in their behavior. The store was a battlefield of subtle slights. She was there more often now, her sighs louder when I restocked shelves, as if my presence was an inconvenience. "Lila's so helpful," she'd say, her voice carrying just enough edge to sting, as the younger woman rearranged displays with a confidence that screamed ownership. He avoided me, his gaze fixed on inventory lists, his fingers twitching when I lingered too long near the office. My brother, meanwhile, flaunted his new watch. Its gleam, a taunt I suspected was funded by the store's accounts I'd spent years balancing. Customers noticed the tension, their whispers following me as I worked, their eyes darting to the newcomer who seemed to belong more than I did. "Clara's just the help now," I overheard him tell a regular, his laugh sharp, meant to wound. I kept my face neutral, my hands steady, but each jab fueled the fire I was stoking. They thought they could push me out, but I was watching, waiting, my librarian's instinct for details sharpening with every passing hour. At the town library, my sanctuary of dusty records and quiet corners, I found refuge in the archives. The marriage certificate had been a shock, but it was the festival flyer's note about the Harper deed, 1920, that gnawed at me. I pulled the physical file from the library's vault, a privilege of my role as archivist, and spread its contents across a table. The deed was brittle, its ink faded but legible, detailing the transfer of the Harper house and store to my great-grandfather. A clause caught my eye, written in tight, formal script: "The property and business shall pass only to a direct heir of the Harper bloodline, as designated by the family head." My pulse quickened. A direct heir. I was that heir, raised to believe the store was my future. But her? The certificate called her Lila Harper Grayson, yet no one had ever mentioned her as family. Was she a cousin, a distant relative? Or something closer, something they'd buried to protect their perfect image? The deeds clause raised a question that shifted everything. If she wasn't a direct heir, why were they giving her my legacy? The library silence was broken by the creak of the door. A local, Mrs. Thompson, approached, her eyes kind but curious. She'd known my family for decades, her husband a miner whose name was etched on a festival lantern. "You're digging into the Harper history," she said, glancing at the deed. "Be careful. That family's got secrets older than this town." Her words were soft, but they carried weight, a warning disguised as gossip. I nodded, my mind flashing to the letter, the receipt, the pendant. "Just curious about our roots," I said, my voice calm, but her hesitation lingered in my thoughts. She knew something, and her reluctance to say more was a clue I'd pursue later. For now, the deed was enough, a weapon I could wield, though I didn't yet know how. Back at the store, the pressure intensified. She called me into the office, her tone clipped, her hands fidgeting with a pen. "You're spending too much time at the library," she said, as if my work there was a betrayal. "The store needs you focused." Focused. The irony burned. I'd given everything to this place, while they funneled money to her for consulting. I met her gaze, my own steady, and asked, "Like Lila's focused? What exactly does she do for the store?" Her eyes narrowed, but before she could answer, he stepped in, his voice gruff. "Enough, Clara. You're making things difficult." Difficult. The word was a slap, but it was his quick glance at her that caught my attention, a shared look that confirmed they were guarding something. I nodded, my silence a weapon, letting them think I was backing down. But I wasn't. I was building a case, piece by piece. That evening, I overheard them in the parlor, their voices low but sharp. "She's asking too many questions," she said, her tone laced with worry. "She won't find anything," he replied, but his voice lacked conviction. My brother's laugh cut through, careless, confident. "Let her dig. She's got nothing." Nothing. The word echoed the festival's humiliation, but it only sharpened my resolve. I slipped upstairs, my fingers brushing the letter in my pocket. The deed's clause, Mrs. Thompson's warning, their nervous glances, they were cracks in their facade, and I'd widen them. What would you do if your family's legacy was built on lies you were never meant to uncover? I was about to tear those lies apart, quietly, precisely, until the truth was mine. The Blackthorn morning was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked coal, the town's pulse slow and steady as I moved through the store's aisles, my hands sorting inventory but my mind on the deed's clause. Only a direct heir could claim the Harper legacy. The letter from Lila, her cryptic talk of an agreement, and her Harper surname on that marriage certificate had tightened the knot of betrayal in my chest. My family's lies were a house of cards, and I was ready to pull the first one, to confront the truth they'd buried beneath years of slights and secrets. The store, my promised inheritance, was slipping away, and I wouldn't let it go without a fight. My resolve was a quiet blade, sharpened by every sidelong glance, every whispered jab, every moment they'd made me feel like I was just taking up space. The office at the back of the store was a cramped shrine to the family's history. Its walls lined with faded photos of miners and old ledgers I'd once balanced. She'd been locking the desk drawers for weeks, a change I'd noticed after Lila's arrival. But I'd kept a skeleton key from my library work, a small perk of my role as archivist. When the store quieted, the last customer gone, I slipped into the office, my heart steady despite the risk. The key turned with a soft click, and the top drawer opened to reveal a folder, its edges worn but its contents pristine. Inside was a contract, dated a year ago, promising Lila a 40% stake in the store. Her signature was bold, confident, but my mother's was shaky, the ink smudged as if her hand had trembled. 40%. My stake, the one I'd earned through years of unpaid hours, was being carved up and handed to a stranger they called family. The words, in recognition of her contributions, jumped out, a lie so blatant it burned. Contributions? She'd been in Blackthorn mere weeks, yet they'd planned this for a year. I photographed the contract with my phone, my fingers steady, my mind racing. The shaky signature wasn't just nerves, it was a crack in their story, a hint of coercion or doubt. Why would she hesitate? What hold did Lila have? I tucked the folder back, locking the drawer, and stepped out just as my brother sauntered in, his new watch glinting. "Snooping, sis?" he asked, his grin sharp but his eyes uneasy. I met his gaze, my voice calm. "Just checking the books. You know, since someone's gotta keep this place running." His laugh was forced, but he didn't push, his glance at the desk betraying a flicker of worry. He knew about the contract, I was sure of it. His complicity was another piece of the puzzle, one I'd use when the time was right. I needed an ally, someone outside their web. Mrs. Delaney, the town's notary and a family friend since I was a child, was my next move. Her office was a small brick building near the town square, its walls lined with records of Blackthorn's history. She greeted me with a warm smile, but her eyes sharpened when I laid the photographed contract on her desk. "This isn't like her," she said, studying the shaky signature. "She was nervous signing this, Clara." I notarized it, but she wouldn't look me in the eye. Her words were a jolt. Nervous? My mother, the woman who'd humiliated me before the town, wasn't the mastermind she seemed. I pressed further, asking about Lila. Mrs. Delaney hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of her desk. "She's been around longer than you think," she said finally, her voice low. "I saw her with your father in Pittsburgh, years ago, before she ever came here." Pittsburgh. The city from the letter, the marriage certificate. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face neutral, thanking her and leaving with a new question. What tied Lila to my father, and why was my mother complicit? Back at the house, I confronted them in the parlor, the air thick with the scent of lavender and tension. She was polishing silverware, her movements brisk, while he sat with a newspaper, his silence a familiar shield. Lila was upstairs, her footsteps faint but ever present. I held up the photograph of the contract, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "What's this agreement?" I asked, watching their faces. Her hands froze, the cloth dropping to the table. "It's just business, Clara," she said, her tongue clipped, but her eyes flicked to him, a tell I didn't miss. He cleared his throat, his fingers twitching. "Lila's helping us modernize the store," he said, the lie flimsy. "Modernize?" I pressed, stepping closer. "With my share?" The room went still, their silence louder than any confession. My brother appeared in the doorway, his smirk gone, his voice sharp. "You're out of line," he said, but his stammer betrayed him. "It's not what you think." But it was. They'd planned to edge me out, and Lila was their tool. I didn't shout or cry. Instead, I folded the photograph, my gaze locking with hers. "I'll find out what's really going on," I said, my words a quiet promise. Her face paled, but she recovered, her voice cold. "You're too nosy, Clara." Nosy. The word was a dismissal, but it only fueled me. Lila's footsteps stopped overhead, as if she'd been listening. I left the parlor, my heart a drumbeat of purpose. The contract, Mrs. Delaney's words, their nervous glances, they were cracks in their facade, and I'd widen them. What would you do if your family sold your future to someone they'd hidden for years? I was about to show them, with a precision they'd never see coming. Rain battered the Victorian house, its rhythm a dull roar against the attic's slanted roof, where I'd retreated after the confrontation in the parlor. The contract giving her a 40% stake in the store, my mother's shaky signature, Mrs. Delaney's cryptic hint about seeing her with my father in Pittsburgh, they were pieces of a betrayal that cut deeper than I'd imagined. The store, my promised legacy, was being carved up, and I was done playing the dutiful daughter, erased to make room for a stranger they called family. My resolve was a cold, unyielding thing, sharpened by every lie, every glance they thought I wouldn't catch. The deed's clause about a direct heir, her Harper surname, the letter about their agreement, they all pointed to a truth I was inches from uncovering. I needed one final piece, and the attic, with its forgotten relics, was where I'd find it. The air up here was thick with dust, the floorboards creaking as I moved through stacks of boxes, their contents a tangle of family history I'd been too busy to explore until now. My flashlight cut through the gloom, illuminating faded labels and brittle papers. I'd come for the old ledger I remembered from my teenage years, the one that chronicled my unpaid hours at the store, but my eyes caught on a wooden chest tucked beneath a broken chair. Its lock was rusted, easily pried open with a screwdriver from a nearby toolbox. Inside, among moth-eaten linens and a miner's cracked helmet, was a bundle of letters tied with twine, their envelopes addressed to my father in a looping, unfamiliar hand. My pulse quickened as I untied the bundle, the paper crumbling at the edges. The top letter, dated 25 years ago, was signed Margaret. My heart stopped. Margaret wasn't a name in our family, not one I'd ever heard. The words were raw, unguarded. "Leonard, you can't keep ignoring her. She's your daughter, too. I won't let you pretend she doesn't exist." Her. The letter trembled in my hands as I read on, the truth slicing through years of lies. Margaret wrote of a child, born in Pittsburgh, a girl my father had promised to support but never acknowledged. "She deserves a place in your world," the letter continued, "even if Evelyn won't accept her." The pieces fell into place with brutal clarity. Lila was his daughter, my half-sister, hidden for decades. The pendant, the contract, the consulting fees, they weren't just favors, they were reparations, a belated attempt to buy her into a family that had rejected her. My mother's shaky signature wasn't fear, it was guilt, complicity in a secret she'd helped bury. I sat back, the attic's chill seeping into my bones, but my mind was alight, cataloging every detail. This wasn't just about the store. It was about a lifetime of deception, my place in this family rewritten to make space for her. I tucked the letter into my coat, my hand steady despite the storm in my chest. Downstairs, the house was quiet, my family unaware of the bomb I now held. At the store, I moved through my tasks with mechanical precision, my eyes tracking their movements. My mother was at the counter, her smile tight as she chatted with a customer, her glances at me sharp with suspicion. My father lingered in the back, his shoulders hunched, his fingers twitching as he sorted inventory. My brother, ever the charmer, was restocking shelves, his new watch catching the light, a reminder of the store's funds he'd drained. Lila was there, too, arranging a display with a confidence that now felt like a claim. I caught her eye, my gaze steady, and for a moment, her smile faltered, as if she sensed the shift in me. I didn't confront them, not yet. My silence was my weapon, letting them think I was still the overlooked daughter, while I planned my next move. Mrs. Delaney's office was my next stop, her desk cluttered with notarized deeds and town records. I showed her the letter, watching her face pale as she read. I suspected, she said, her voice low, but I didn't know for sure. Your father was always cagey about Pittsburgh. She hesitated, then added, there's more, Clara. I notarized another document, years ago, about a trust for someone in Pittsburgh. I didn't connect it to Lila until now. A trust. Another secret, another piece of my legacy diverted. I thanked her, my voice calm, but inside, I was rewriting the narrative they'd fed me. They'd built a life on lies, and I'd been the collateral damage, my sacrifices erased to make room for a daughter they'd hidden back at the house. I overheard them in the kitchen, their voices low but tense. She's getting too close. My mother said, her tone sharp with worry. She won't find anything, my father replied, but his voice cracked, betraying his doubt. My brother's laugh was forced, his words dismissive. Let her try. She's got nothing. Nothing. The word stung, but it only sharpened my focus. I slipped upstairs, the letter heavy in my pocket, its words a blade I'd wield when the time was right. Miss Carter, the lawyer Mrs. Delaney had mentioned, would be my next contact, someone to help me challenge the contract, the trust, the lies. They thought they could bury me, but I was cutting through their power, piece by piece. What would you do if your family's love was a lie, built to hide a truth they'd die to protect? I was about to show them, with a precision that would leave no room for doubt. The Victorian house groaned under the weight of a late summer storm, its windows rattling as I sat in the attic, the letter from Margaret, Lila's mother, clutched in my hand. Her words, exposing my half-sister's existence, had shattered the illusion of my family's loyalty, revealing a decades-old secret they'd buried to protect their image. The store, my promised legacy, was slipping away, not just through a contract or a deeds clause, but through a pattern of deception that stretched back generations. My mother's shaky signature, my father's nervous tics, my brother's smug confidence, they were all complicit, and I was done being the overlooked daughter, erased to make room for their lies. My resolve was a cold, unyielding force, honed by every slight, every secret I'd uncovered. I needed more than the letter. I needed proof that their betrayal wasn't just personal but part of a family history they'd hidden, a cycle I'd break. The library's archive room was my refuge, its shelves heavy with Blackthorn's past, the air thick with the scent of old paper. The 1920 deed had hinted at a disputed inheritance, and Mrs. Delaney's mention of a Pittsburgh trust had set my instincts alight. I pulled every record tied to the Harper name, my fingers tracing faded ink as I pieced together a story no one had told me. Among the files, I found a court document from 1921, brittle and yellowed, detailing a legal battle over the store. A woman named Eliza Harper, my great-grandfather's sister, had challenged the family, claiming her son, a child born out of wedlock, was entitled to a share. The family had fought her, their lawyers arguing the boy wasn't a direct heir to protect the bloodline clause. The case was dismissed, and Eliza was left with nothing, her son erased from the family's legacy. My heart thudded. The Harpers had done this before, buried a child to protect their name, just as they'd hidden Lila. History wasn't just repeating, it was their playbook. The document was a bombshell, not just for its contents but for what it revealed about my family's ruthlessness. They hadn't just betrayed me, they'd built their empire on betrayal, generation after generation. I photographed the pages, my hand steady despite the rage simmering inside. This wasn't just about Lila, it was about a family that discarded anyone who threatened their control. I slipped the photos into my bag, my mind already mapping my next move. Miss Carter, the lawyer Mrs. Delaney had connected me with, would know how to use this, but I needed to confront the source of the lie. First. At the store, the air was tense, the clatter of customers drowned by the storm outside. My mother was at the counter, her eyes narrowing as I approached. My father was in the back, his shoulders hunched over a crate. My brother was rearranging a display, his watch glinting, a symbol of the funds he'd siphoned. Lila was there, too, her pendant catching the light as she watched me, her confidence shaken since our last encounter. I didn't waste time. I found something interesting, I said, my voice calm, my gaze locked on my mother. A court case from 1921. Eliza Harper and her son. Her face paled, her hands gripping the counter. My father froze, his fingers twitching. My brother's smirk vanished, his eyes darting to Lila, who stepped closer, her posture defensive. What are you talking about? My mother asked, her voice sharp but unsteady. I pulled out my phone, showing the photo of the document. You hid a child before, I said. Just like you hid Lila. The store was never meant for someone outside the bloodline. My father's head snapped up, his eyes wide. Clara, you don't understand, he began, but I cut him off. I understand you lied. All of you. 4 years. My brother stepped forward, his voice low. You're making a fool of yourself, sis. But his stammer betrayed him, and I saw fear in his eyes for the first time. Lila's hand went to her pendant, her voice soft but calculated. You're digging up old wounds, Clara. Let it go. Let it go. The words were a taunt, but her eyes flickered with doubt. I turned to my father, my voice cold. Was Eliza's son your father's shame, too? Is that why you're so good at this? His face crumpled, a rare crack in his silence, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. My mother's hand shook as she reached for him, but he pulled away, his guilt a weight I could almost see. The customers nearby fell silent, their eyes wide, the scene unfolding like a storm breaking. I didn't raise my voice, didn't need to. My calm was a weapon, cutting deeper than anger. I'm taking this to Miss Carter, I said, my words a blade. The deed, the contract, the letters, all of it. My mother gasped, but my brother grabbed my arm. You'll ruin us, he hissed. I shook him off, my gaze steady. You ruined yourselves. I walked out, the rain soaking me as I headed to Miss Carter's office. She was waiting, her desk covered in legal files, her eyes sharp as I laid out the evidence, the deed, the contract, the letters, the court case. This is solid, she said, studying the documents. The 1920 deeds clause is clear. Lila's claim is shaky at best. She paused, her voice softening. But Clara, this will tear your family apart. I nodded, my heart heavy but unyielding. They tore it apart first. The truth was my power now, and I'd use it to reclaim my place. What would you do if your family's legacy was a lie, repeated across generations? I was about to end it, with a precision that would echo through Blackthorn. The Blackthorn sky was heavy with clouds, the air thick with the promise of rain as I walked from Miss Carter's office, my mind a steel trap holding every piece of evidence I'd gathered. The letter revealing Lila as my half-sister, the 1921 court case exposing my family's history of burying inconvenient heirs, the contract with my mother's shaky signature, they were weapons I'd honed, ready to dismantle the lies that had pushed me to the margins of my own life. The store, my promised legacy, wasn't just a business. It was the heart of my identity, the one thing I'd poured my youth into, only to be told I was taking up space. My family's betrayal, rooted in a pattern stretching back generations, was a wound I'd turned into resolve, cold and unyielding. I wasn't just fighting for the store now, I was fighting for the truth, for my place in a town that had watched my humiliation at the Miners' Lantern Festival. Ms. Carter had laid out my options with clinical precision, her office a stark contrast to the chaos of my thoughts. The 1920 deeds clause about a direct heir gave me a clear claim, but Lila's contract complicated things. We can challenge it, she said, her eyes sharp over her glasses. Your mother's signature suggests duress, and your father's trust in Pittsburgh raises questions about intent. She paused, her voice softening. But Clara, this will expose everything, your father's affair, Lila's identity, the family's history. Are you ready for that? I nodded, my jaw tight. They exposed me first. My voice was calm, but inside, I was a furnace, burning with the need to reclaim what was mine. Miss Carter agreed to draft a legal challenge, but I knew the real battle would be in the court of Blackthorn's opinion, where whispers carried more weight than gavels. Back at the store, the tension was a living thing, coiling around every interaction. My mother was behind the counter, her movements brisk but her eyes darting to me, wary. My father was in the back, his silence heavier than ever, his fingers twitching as he sorted inventory. My brother was charming a customer, his watch glinting, a reminder of the funds he'd drained from the store I'd kept afloat. Lila was there, too, her pendant catching the light as she rearranged a display with a confidence that now felt hollow. I'd confronted them with the 1921 court case, and their reactions, her pallor, his guilt, my brother's stammer, had confirmed their fear. They knew I was closing in, but they didn't know how far I'd go. I moved to the office, my steps deliberate, and found a ledger I'd overlooked before, tucked behind a stack of invoices. Its pages were recent, detailing payments to a Pittsburgh account labeled consulting, but the amounts were staggering, thousands more than the $1,500 I'd found earlier. My mother's initials were scrawled beside each entry, but the handwriting shifted halfway through, mimicking hers but sloppier, as if someone else had tried to forge it. My brother, his greed, always cloaked in charm, was unraveling their scheme. I photographed the pages, my heart steady despite the betrayal's fresh sting. This wasn't just about Lila, my brother had been skimming, using her as a front to drain the store while they distracted me with their lies. The discovery was a blade I'd wield carefully, but not yet. Mrs. Delaney called me to her office that afternoon, her voice urgent. I found something, she said, sliding an old journal across her desk. It belonged to my great-grandmother, dated 1922, a year after Eliza's court case. The entries were sparse, but one stood out: they paid her to leave, to keep quiet. About the boy. The store stays ours, but at what cost? My breath caught. The Harpers hadn't just fought Eliza in court, they'd bribed her, erased her son, and kept the store through coercion. The journal was proof, not just of history but of a family willing to sacrifice anyone for control. Mrs. Delaney's eyes were soft but firm. "You're not like them, Clara," she said. "But exposing this will change how Blackthorn sees you." I nodded, my resolve unshaken. Let it change. That evening, I stood in the parlor, the journal and ledger photos in my pocket, my family gathered like actors in a play they hadn't rehearsed. My mother's hands fidgeted with a cloth, my father's gaze fixed on the floor, my brother's smirk gone, replaced by unease. Lila stood by the window, her pendant glinting, her face unreadable. "I know everything," I said, my voice low, cutting through the silence. "The affair, the trust, the forged payments, the bribes a century ago." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "Clara, please," he began, but I held up a hand. "You don't get to beg now." My brother stepped forward, his voice sharp. "You're destroying us." I met his gaze, my own cold. "You destroyed yourselves when you thought I'd stay silent." I turned to Lila, my half-sister, the stranger who'd taken my place. "You knew," I said, my words a quiet accusation. Her eyes flickered, but she didn't deny it. "I just wanted what I was owed," she said, her voice soft but defiant. Owed. The word echoed their lies, their belief that my sacrifices meant nothing. I didn't shout, didn't cry. My calm was a storm they couldn't weather. "Miss Carter's filing tomorrow," I said, my gaze sweeping over them. "The store is mine, and the town will know why." I walked out, their silence deafening. The weight of their betrayal lifting with every step. What would you do if your family's lies cost you everything you'd built? I was about to take it all back, and Blackthorn would see it unfold. The Blackthorn air was crisp, the Miners' Lantern Festival a distant memory as I stood outside the Harper General Store, its weathered sign creaking in the autumn breeze. The town square buzzed with whispers, eyes darting my way, not with pity but with a quiet respect I hadn't felt before. My family's lies, Lila's identity as my half-sister, the forged payments, the 1921 cover-up of another hidden heir, had been a house of cards I'd toppled with precision. The store, my promised legacy, was now mine, secured through Ms. Carter's legal challenge, but the victory wasn't just in the deed. It was in the truth, laid bare for Blackthorn to see, a truth that had transformed me from the overlooked daughter into a symbol of something fiercer. I'd been told I was taking up space, but I'd carved out my place with every letter, every ledger, every calculated step. Ms. Carter had moved swiftly, her challenge filed the morning after my confrontation in the parlor. The 1920 deeds clause, only a direct heir could claim the store, rendered Lila's contract null, her 40% stake a fiction built on my mother's coerced signature and my brother's forged entries. The courtroom was small, the judge a local who knew the Harper name, his eyes narrowing as I presented the evidence, the letter from Margaret, the 1921 court case, the journal detailing the bribe to silence Eliza's son. My mother sat rigid, her hands clasped, her face pale as the truth spilled out. My father's silence was broken only by a single, choked apology, his eyes avoiding mine. My brother's charm crumbled, his stammering excuses drowned by the weight of the ledger's proof. Lila, my half-sister, stood apart, her pendant no longer a claim but a relic of a failed scheme. The judge's ruling was swift, the store was mine, the contract void, the trust in Pittsburgh frozen pending review. But the real shift came outside the courtroom. I'd given the evidence to a local reporter, a young woman who'd grown up buying candy at the store. Her article, published in the Blackthorn Gazette, was a wildfire, spreading online within hours. "Harper Family Secrets Exposed, a Legacy of Lies," the headline read, detailing Lila's hidden parentage, the 1921 cover-up, and my fight to reclaim what was mine. The post went viral, shared across platforms, with comments flooding in, "She took back her legacy. This is what justice looks like." My name, Clara Harper, became a hashtag, a rallying cry for those who'd been pushed aside, their stories buried under family loyalties. Blackthorn's townsfolk, once witnesses to my humiliation, now stopped me in the street, their nods a quiet acknowledgement of my strength. Mrs. Delaney, her notary seal a cornerstone of my case, squeezed my hand at the market. "You've changed this town," she said, her voice soft but proud, yet not everyone celebrated. My mother retreated into silence, her manipulation exposed, her image as the perfect matriarch shattered. My father left for Pittsburgh, his guilt a shadow he couldn't outrun. My brother, stripped of his unearned privileges, took a job at a gas station, his watch pawned to cover debts. Lila vanished, her pendant left on my old bedroom's dresser, a silent admission of defeat. I didn't gloat, didn't revel in their downfall. My victory wasn't in their ruin but in my reclamation, in standing where they'd tried to erase me. The store's hardwood floors felt different now, each creak a reminder of the years I'd poured into it, the sacrifices they'd dismissed. I hired new staff, locals who saw the store as more than a business, and planned a community event for the next festival, one that would honor Blackthorn's miners, not my family's lies. As I stood in the store's doorway, the town square, glowing with evening lanterns, I looked back on the journey that had brought me here. The pain of their betrayal, the festival's public slight, the loss of my room, the discovery of Lila's identity, had been a fire that could have consumed me. Instead, I'd let it forge me, turning grief into a blade of clarity. The attics, letters, the library's archives, the courtroom's verdict, they were battles in a war I hadn't chosen but refused to lose. The lesson wasn't about revenge or righteousness, it was colder, truer. Family isn't owed your loyalty when it demands your erasure. For those of us who've spent years being reliable, invisible, the ones who carry the weight while others take the credit, the truth is this: your worth isn't defined by their approval. It's built in the quiet moments when you choose yourself, when you fight for what you've earned, even if it means standing alone. To anyone watching this, anyone who's felt pushed aside, told their sacrifices don't matter, you are not taking up space. Your place is yours to claim, not with anger but with the steady, unapologetic strength of knowing your value. Dig for the truth, hold it like a lantern, and let it light your way. They may try to bury you, but you can rise, just as I did, and build something stronger than their lies. If my story resonates, if it sparks something in you, subscribe to follow the next chapter, because there's more to come, and we're just getting started.